Over 500 years ago, before Columbus ever dreamt of America, a great civilization thrived in Peru. 10 million people lived in an empire with palaces as large as any in Europe, buildings coated in gold, the Incas. They ruled an empire as large as ancient Rome, 15,000 miles of roads, crime virtually unknown, master architects. This remarkable empire was crushed and conquered by the Spanish conquistadors in the 1530s. But high in the mountains, one city escapes untouched. Carved from giant stones atop sheer granite slopes, forgotten for centuries, it is Peru's greatest riddle. Built between heaven and earth, no records explain it. No one remembers who built it or why. A city in the clouds, Machu Picchu. The man who will find it feels lost. He comes to Peru hoping for a discovery that will make him famous. At first, the world will ignore him and his discovery, but when they finally see what he has found, his dream will come true. He will bring the world to the city, and the city will bring the world to him. In the final years of the 1920s, this man is one of America's most famous politicians, Hiram Bingham III. A senator from Connecticut, he is tall, handsome, and has made a name for himself as an author, professor, pilot, and now as a politician.
The Autogyro is away for the golf link. It's an easy step to the links by Autogyro.
His upper-class bearing earns him as many enemies as friends. He is a man of contrasts and enormous ambition.
It is good for the government, it is good for the country, and it is good for all of us to enjoy a good glass of beer.
But none of this would have been possible had it not been for the greatest adventure of his life, 20 years before. June 1911. Hiram Bingham packs for a journey to the jungles of Peru. His goal is to seek out the legendary lost city of the Incas.
He was never trained as an archaeologist. He was on the Yale faculty. He was a professor of Latin American history and geography rather than archaeology. But it was a time when exploration was very much in the news.
It is an age when the very ends of the earth are within the reach of human footsteps.
September 7th, 1909. Commander Robert E. Peary has discovered the North Pole. From all over the world comes full acknowledgement of Peary's feat and congratulations on his success.
A time when the thrill of exploration fascinates everyone, from the pauper in the street to presidents like Teddy Roosevelt. When a great discovery can make a man more famous than a movie star.
Kipling wrote a poem that influenced my father, I'm sure, called The Explorer, in which the phrase appears, something lost behind the ranges, something calling to you, go, words to that effect. So it seemed natural to achieve fame by becoming an explorer.
June 8th, 1911. Bingham's quest for fame leads him on a journey to Peru. He brings a team from Yale and the latest books on the Incas. But why Peru? In 1909, the South American history teacher saw his first Incan ruin, Choqquequirao. Some said it was the lost city, but Bingham has his doubts. The lost city is still out there, and a seed is sown in Bingham's soul. Bingham's family is no stranger to adventure. In the 1820s, his grandfather left New England to become Hawaii's first missionary.
In my book, Portrait of an Explorer, I had to go back to his early history for some of the motivations, it was clear that having been brought up so strictly by a missionary family that considered his grandfather, the first Hiram Bingham, to have been a great man, he wanted to be a great man too.
And there is another reason. In 1900, Bingham marries Elfrida Mitchell, heiress to the Tiffany fortune. Overnight, he joins the American aristocracy.
As he once told me, he didn't want to be known simply as the man who married a Tiffany heiress. He wanted to make a name for himself on his own to justify his marriage to a wealthy woman.
Determined to prove himself, Bingham and his team travel into the interior. For 4 days, they battle with altitude sickness as they climb 11,000 feet into the Peruvian highlands, past a timeless landscape. Bingham's search for clues begins in Cusco, the ancient capital of the Incans. Streets are living history for Bingham. This was home to the Incan king and 40,000 subjects. Bingham sees hints of their glory everywhere. 20,000 men labored 3 decades to construct the fortress of Sacsayhuaman. He finds temple walls once sheeted in gold to reflect the rays of their god, the sun. Much has disappeared. Bingham imagines the treasures within the palaces. Gold, called the sweat of the sun. Silver, the tears of the moon. Precious metals for worship, not trade. A pious tribute to the gods from whom the kings were descended. But Bingham knows that this age of glory did not last. The walls hold the clue, solid, enduring. But the stones above testify to the crush of a more dominant force. The Spanish. In the 1530s, they came to Peru for gold and God, bringing guns and horses, smallpox and greed. Their empire had overrun Mexico, Panama, and the Caribbean, and they still craved more gold. In the greed of the aging, illiterate soldier, Francisco Pizarro, the Spanish Catholic Empire collided with Peru's magnificent Empire of the Sun. The conquest was short and brutal. In 1533, Pizarro and his men descended on the golden streets of Cusco. Within 2 years, the city had been ransacked, stripped of gold, melted down to ingots to satisfy their greed. 3 years later, the Incan king struck back. Thousands of Incans descended on the city. Hand-to-hand combat raged in the streets. Fires were set to burn the conquistadors from hiding. Hopelessly outnumbered, the remaining few dozen conquistadors withdrew to a key fortress and shut themselves in. 11 months passed. Eventually, the Incan forces dispersed, returning to their fields. The Spanish held out. Reinforcements arrived. The Incan king had lost. Exile meant building a new capital in the forsaken jungle where the conquistadors couldn't penetrate. But where? In the ancient volumes of the libraries, Bingham reads the few accounts of their retreat. Within the chronicles of a few religious men and Spanish soldiers are found the only sketchy clues to the lost city. Details of architecture, estimated days of travel. He copies the words for his reference in the field. From these, he will take his best guess and begin his jungle search. Bingham's final preparations for the journey take him to the outlying valley of the Urubamba, to acquire mules to carry loads and gear. Peru has changed greatly in 400 years, yet the ancient culture is still reflected in daily lives of the Peruvian people. In their language, Quechua, which the Inca imposed on the conquered people to unify the empire. In their customs and traditions, weaving and textiles, which were traded as a form of currency, and the pure-blooded faces of the people themselves. Even in 1911, no day is begun, no voyage undertaken, no harvest complete without the permission of the gods. In his search, Bingham follows a consistent pattern. He seeks out locals, anyone with information, even rumors, then follows up and pays for any good advice. Ironically, his best clue comes not from a book, but a drunken government official named Quevedo. He mentions a name Bingham has never read in any chronicle. Machu Picchu. Strange words that just a few days later will lead an ambitious young American to a great temple in the clouds. By July 19th, Bingham is ready to head out. He will leave Cusco and head north along river valleys with only sketchy maps and fragmented descriptions from the Spanish chronicles to guide him. But he cannot succeed alone. A military escort is assigned by the local prefect, a Sergeant Carrasco, who is charged with accompanying him everywhere and to serve as a translator of the Quechua language. Also with him will be fellow Yale man Dr. Harry Foote, the expedition's naturalist and collector of insects and specimens from this little-known part of the world. Bingham writes to his wife,
My dearly beloved, nearly all the last things have been done. It remains to pack my trunk, which stays here, get some sleep, pack my duffel, and then start for the interior.
The valley of the Urubamba is enchantingly beautiful, still terraced in the Incan style.
This is one of the loveliest valleys in Peru. It was a favorite resort of the Incas. I do want you to see this. It is worth it at all costs. The mountains are indescribably grand when one can see 10,000 feet of them.
As he wrote in the letter that I found in the papers to his father at the time of his starting on his first expedition, that he felt the blood of his ancestors stirring in his veins, and that he felt was part of his genetic inheritance to want to travel and explore.
There is a new government road which Bingham follows into a region visited only by local Indians since Incan times. Somewhere, lost behind these ranges, are Incan cities that fit the descriptions in the ancient library chronicles. The chronicles say the city will be called Vitcos, not Machu Picchu. It will have a palace with an extensive view, marble doorways, a great rock shrine, and a mention of another name, Vilcabamba. What Bingham cannot know is that there is more than one lost city, and it will be his destiny to find them. On July 24th, Bingham and his team are camped near the spot where the drunken Quevedo has told them of ruins. What happens next is a story Bingham will tell and retell for the rest of his life.
On the 6th day out from Cuzco, we arrived at a little plantation called Mandor Pampa. The owner, Arteaga, had said that on top of the magnificent precipices nearby, there were some ruins at a place called Machu Picchu.
He venido
I offered to pay him well if he would show me the ruins. He demurred and said it was too much of a climb for such a wet day. But when he found that we were willing to pay him a sol, 3 or 4 times the ordinary daily wage in this vicinity, he finally agreed to guide us.
Bueno, tal vez el tiempo cambia.
Leaving the stream, we now struggled up the bank through the dense jungle, and in a few minutes reached the bottom of a very precipitous slope. For an hour and 20 minutes we had a very hard climb. A good part of our distance we went on all fours, sometimes holding on by the tips of our fingers. Arteaga groaned and said there were lots of snakes here. There were no ruins or Andines of any kind in sight. Shortly after noon, just as we were completely exhausted, we reached a little grass-covered hut 2,000 feet above the river, where several good-natured Indians, pleasantly surprised at our unexpected arrival, welcomed us with dripping gourds full of cool, delicious water. Then they set before us a few cooked sweet potatoes.
Valentincha.
Arteaga had been there once before. They sent a small boy with me as a guide. Hardly had we left the hut and rounded the promontory, then we were confronted by an unexpected sight. A great flight of beautifully constructed stone-faced terraces, perhaps 100 of them, each hundreds of feet long and 10 feet high. We patiently followed the little guide. Suddenly, I found myself confronted with the walls of ruined houses built of the finest quality of Inca stonework. The little boy urged us to climb up a steep hill over what seemed to be a flight of stone steps. We came to a great stairway of large granite blocks. Suddenly, we found ourselves standing before 2 of the most interesting structures in ancient America. Fortunately, in this land where accuracy of reporting what one has seen is not a prevailing characteristic of travelers, I had a good camera and the sun was shining.
Bingham discovers whole building complexes, masked by centuries of tangled undergrowth. What little can be cleared is unmistakably Incan. The Intihuatana, used by priests to observe the heavens, perfectly aligned to observe the summer solstice. Windows carved with exquisite skill, a ruin without equal, and a city unknown. Machu Picchu, a mysterious name that Bingham has never seen in any chronicle, a riddle bequeathed by the Incan gods. A holy city built to be near the home of the thunder god, reaching towards the sacred sun, ancestor of the Incan sovereigns. A perfect blend of architecture and the natural environment. A city that shouldn't exist.
It's curious that he only spent a few hours at the site. He noted in his diary the time of his arrival and the time that he'd taken these photographs and what they represented. But it wasn't more than 3 or 4 hours that he spent wandering around with this camera.
Bingham has come to find the lost Incan capital as described in the chronicles. But without a great rock shrine, Machu Picchu doesn't fit the description. A great view alone is not enough. So, at precisely 5:05 p.m., he leaves. This isn't what he came for.
It wasn't until later that he realized how important a discovery he had made.
On July 25th, 1911, Hiram Bingham, looking for the lost Incan city, moves deeper into the uncharted valley of the Urubamba, confused and puzzled by the spectacular ruins he has just discovered at Machu Picchu. August begins with a week of fruitless searching.
August 3rd, 1911. My dearly beloved, at last we're at Santa Ana, staying at the fine sugar estate of Senor Pedro Duque.
Now, Bingham is starting to convince himself that maybe Machu Picchu was what he was looking for.
Yesterday, after a long conference with Senor Duque, I came to the conclusion that my new ruins, the fine ones at Machu Picchu, must be those referred to in the chronicles by the name of Vitkos.
Local Indians tell Bingham of extensive ruins deep in a valley called Vilcabamba. Bingham decides to push on. The rumors intrigue him. He has come too far to turn back now. Bingham enters a valley rich in history. In 1537, this was the path of the Incan retreat. Remote cities were built in the mountain vastness. Trails were destroyed and bridges cut to seal their escape. Bingham follows in their footsteps. As the jungle gets thicker, it becomes harder for the mules, exactly what the fleeing Incans wanted. At the end of this arduous passage, a tiny settlement called Lucma.
August 7th, 1911. My dearly beloved, this locality is reputed hereabouts to have a lot of ruins, just as I hoped it would. No one has been up here. I have shown several of my Peruvian friends the pictures of my family.
It's my papa.
They always admire them all tremendously.
See?
While Bingham seeks clues to ruins, Harry Foote is making another sort of collection. Foote is an amateur naturalist, but a talented one. He is finding quite a few formerly unknown specimens. The villagers of Lucma tell Bingham of nearby ruins with a great granite shrine, just as the chronicles predict. With an Indian guide and the local lieutenant governor, he heads for the site.
I found myself on a pleasant open plaza, bounded on its north side by the ruins of a large palace. The view from the plaza is a particularly extensive one on all sides. To the north and south are snow-capped mountains, and to the east and west, deep, beautiful valleys.
A palace on a hill with an extensive view. So far, so good. And at the center of the ruin, a building more than 200 feet long and 43 feet wide. A masterpiece of Incan architecture. The treasure is gone, but the craftsmanship endures. Doorways of solid granite, 6 to 8 feet thick, quarried, shaped, and moved up the slopes by hand.
Enough remains of this building to give a good idea of its former grandeur. It was indeed a residence fit for a royal Inca, an exile from Cuzco.
Is this Vitcos? There is only one way to be sure. Find the great rock shrine.
We arrived at this place at 4 o'clock and were at once impressed by the truth of what we had heard and convinced that this was indeed the sacred spot. The rock was so much overgrown and surrounded with jungle, especially on 2 sides, that we made arrangements with the lieutenant governor to have a force of Indians come here on the morrow and clear the rock so we could take photographs and make measurements of it.
Ok, señores. Por favor, arriba. Arriba.
Bingham is convinced. This is the holy shrine of Vitcos. To the Spanish, a nest of pagan demons. But for the Incans, this was a sacred shrine, abode of the gods, bursting with power. A place to make sacrifices, to ask for help with crops, to foretell the future, to beg for protection. The rock is final proof that Bingham has found Vitcos, the ancient capital. But is it the last Incan city? There is the second name mentioned in the chronicles, Vilcabamba. There could be another palace still hidden. Bingham carries on, reliving the final chapters of the Incan Empire. The Spanish had crushed almost all resistance, torturing, raping, forcing thousands into the mines. Only one holdout remained, the Incan king in his jungle court. In 1572, the Spanish ruler in Peru decreed the Incan king must die. They found he had escaped from Vitcos, but the Spanish resolve was fierce, and Bingham is just as determined. An Indian gives Bingham information. There are some ruins, sometimes called Vilcabamba the Old, a few days away through dense, steep jungle.
This is hay ruinas.
Sí, gracias.
But Bingham also receives a warning. He is entering the territory of the Campa Indians, reputed to be murderers, under the command of a warlord named Saavedra. The alarm is ignored.
Above all, my father was adventurous. He liked danger. He heard about the dangers of the savage Indians in the Amazon, and wanted to face up to them.
Bingham pushes on, not for fame this time, but to prove to himself he has what it takes as an explorer.
One of our informants said the Inca city was called Espiritu Pampa, or the Plain of Ghosts. Would the ruins turn out to be ghosts? Would they vanish on the arrival of white men with cameras and measuring tapes? By 1 o'clock, we found ourselves in dense woods, through which it was impossible to see for more than a few feet. Guzman said that we ought to send ahead one of our carriers to warn the savages that we were coming on a friendly mission. Otherwise, they might attack us. The carrier, who was selected to go ahead, did not relish his task at all. It was a rather exciting half hour while we waited, wondering what the attitude the savages would take towards us, trying to picture to ourselves the potentate Saavedra, who had been painted as sitting in the midst of savage luxury, surrounded by 50 servants.
No savages, no shower of poison arrows. Saavedra's jungle kingdom turns out to be nothing more than a modest family plantation, carved out of the thick jungle. An agreeable man, Saavedra leads Bingham to the ruins. This is a place that has been rarely disturbed over 400 years.
Here in dense wet woods, we found the remains of 15 or 20 small rectangular buildings. The characteristic architecture of the principal group of ruins would have no doubt in our minds that these buildings had been constructed by the Incas.
Eagerly, Bingham orders the undergrowth to be cleared. What emerges is the remains of a small Incan settlement, houses, sewers, and at least one large building. But what Bingham cannot see is that the jungle is hiding hundreds of buildings. This city once contained great cedar doorways, racetracks for horses, walls with painted murals, a home for thousands of Incans. Years later, newly discovered chronicles describe the fate of Vilcabamba. When the Spanish army reached this place in 1572, they found it already abandoned and burned. They christened it Espiritu Pampa, the plain of ghosts. The surviving Incans had melted into the forest, but after a month's pursuit, their last king was captured, returned to Cusco, and executed. The Empire of the Sun had been destroyed forever. Bingham leaves the jungle happy. He has proven himself as an explorer. He has found Vitcos and its sacred granite shrine, Vilcabamba, last throne of the Incan kings, and a third city, Machu Picchu, without mention nor seeming significance in any ancient writings, and yet spectacular, a complete mystery. Bingham now believes surely fame awaits his return. Back in America, Hiram Bingham finds his discoveries eclipsed by Amundsen's reaching the South Pole. With the South Pole conquered, the age of exploration is declared complete. But Bingham's return thrills his family. Elfrida and their 6 sons are deeply proud of their explorer and his exotic discoveries. Elfrida is also relieved. She has found running the household alone exhausting. But Bingham can't stay. His instincts tell him the ruins still have more secrets to reveal. He spends months trying to raise money for another mission. And in February 1912, a lucky break. The editor of National Geographic magazine attends one of his slideshows. The editor is impressed. He offers to send Bingham back to Peru to clear the ruins and photograph them for publication. For Hiram Bingham, celebrity is just an expedition away. By July 1912, Bingham is back in Peru. He seeks to solve the riddle of Machu Picchu. Who built it and why?
My dearly beloved, we are all very well, but are having bad luck with our search for buried bones and pots. This is a lovely spot. It is most disappointing not being able to find anything worthwhile.
Who lived here? A city this important should have gold, bronze, perhaps even mummies.
We finally offered a prize of 1 sol to any workman who could report the whereabouts of a cave containing a skull and who would leave the cave exactly as he found it.
The gambit succeeds. At last, Machu Picchu is beginning to give up its secrets.
My joy knew no bounds, and I was able to lay hands for the first time at Machu Picchu on a perfect piece of Incan pottery.
Bingham immerses himself in the Incan realm. Water jugs and drinking ladles, reflections of ancient fetishes and dreams. A lucky hunchback, a puma, a croaking frog, charms and implements left with the dead for use in the next world, a world so close Incans saw ghosts often, and mysteries that the deeply spiritual Incans sensed all around them. 3 months of clearing reveal a wonder. Beneath nature's green shroud, Bingham discovers the remains of an entire city. Bingham is amazed by what he sees. In these houses, husbands, wives, and their children once lived beneath thatched roofs, and staircases, 3,000 steps, winding their way through the city like snakes. Over 100 terraces carved into the mountainside, fields of potatoes and maize. Stonework so perfectly joined that even after 400 years, no vines find their way through the cracks. "250 buildings, fountains, bathhouses, even a prison. 1,000 people lived here, but what is this place? One building may hold a clue. A strange building with rounded walls, totally unlike the rest of Machu Picchu. Within the walls, a monolith of granite. A magical stone, an altar so important that the Incans built a holy shrine to enclose it. And nearby, Hiram Bingham finds another sacred site. He calls it the Principal Temple, built around a second great natural altar.
All right. All right, take it close.
Bingham concludes that Machu Picchu was built for the worship of the Incan gods. Unknown to the Spanish conquerors, untouched for 400 years, it is an unbroken window into the Incan spiritual world. Architecture of sublime perfection. Stonework so precise only one person would have been worth the effort. An Incan king. Bingham christens this compound the King's Group, a palace for the Son of Gods, surrounded by a legion of priests and servants who attended his royal majesty. A king dressed in cloaks of the finest fabrics, some even made of bat skin. But there was one place where even the king was humbled. The Intihuatana, compass, observatory, and shrine. One of the few in all Peru not smashed by the conquering Catholic Spaniards. A great stone that measured the course of the heavens, sun, moon, stars, each a god in whose power rested the fertility of the land and the lives of mortal men. With no written language, the Incans left only the legacy of their stones. And Hiram Bingham has found the only Incan city left untouched by the conquistadors. A perfect window on the past.
Just now, when we thought there was practically no portion of the Earth's surface still unknown, one member of the Daredevil Explorer's craft has struck it rich. The lucky man is Professor Hiram Bingham of Yale. He has just announced that he has had the superb good fortune to discover an entire city. He calls it Machu Picchu.
In 1913, Bingham's photos of the Incan city fill an entire issue of National Geographic magazine. The images amaze and enthrall a public fascinated by tales of exploration. Overnight, Machu Picchu becomes a legend. In the decades to come, this mysterious city becomes a magnet for thousands of visitors. Tourists, scholars, and film crews flock to the ruin, seeking to understand its riddles and get a glimpse into a lost Incan past.
Rested undisturbed until the expedition of Dr. Hiram Bingham cleared away.
For Hiram Bingham, the city gives him what he always wanted: fame, and entry into the inner circle of the world's greatest explorers.
His fame reached its peak at a dinner that he was asked to be present at when Peary, the discoverer of the North Pole, and Amundsen, the discoverer of the South Pole, met before the cameras at a big dinner at the headquarters of the National Geographic Society. That certainly gave him a sense of his importance as an explorer.
Building on his fame as an explorer, Bingham enters politics. By 1925, he leaves his post as governor of Connecticut to serve in Washington as a senator.
An amendment to the federal Constitution.
Bingham adores the status and attention. He becomes one of the country's most visible politicians, never forgetting his love of adventure or the power of pictures to promote himself and his causes. But Bingham's luck runs out in 1929, the year when all of America hits hard times. Bingham's enthusiasm for quick success finally leads him astray. He hires a lobbyist and becomes embroiled in a conflict of interest scandal. Bingham has earned many enemies. Fellow senators resent his money, his aristocratic manner, and his habit of correcting their Latin. The Senate seizes on his mistake. Bingham is formally censured by his peers, a humiliating blow. Bingham loses the next election in 1932, the same year that Alfreda, his long-suffering wife, leaves him. Bingham's meteoric rise has finally come to an end. But through it all, Bingham never forgets about Machu Picchu. Over the years, he retells the story of his greatest discovery over and over again.
In 1912, thanks to the support of the National Geographic Society and of Yale University, we were able to go back and spend 4 months in clearing the ruins of the mighty jungle that had accumulated there over 300 years.
And in 1948, the man and the city come together one last time. Bingham is invited to dedicate the highway that will lead tourists up to Machu Picchu. Ironically, Bingham pays little attention to the other cities he found in 1911, both last refuges of the Incan king. Neither city excites the public the way Machu Picchu does.
While he had a distinguished career in other fields, his name is remembered primarily as the discoverer of Machu Picchu, and he naturally wanted it to appear as important as possible.
To the end of his life, Bingham inflates the importance of Machu Picchu. He declares it to be both the birthplace of the Incan Empire and its final refuge. Bingham dies in 1956, never learning the answer to the greatest puzzle of all. Who built this lost city and why? Today, Machu Picchu's origins are finally understood. It was not the citadel of the first Incan king or the last. It was the private sanctuary of the greatest king of all, Pachacuti. In the 1400s, he conquered all of Peru for Cusco. He ordered the construction of the greatest fortresses in the empire, armies of workers cutting and hauling thousands of stones in a country without the help of the wheel, horses, or even oxen. All done for Pachacuti. But in the winters, he came to Machu Picchu, his personal retreat, a place to rest and entertain leaders of the empire. But Bingham found no trace of the king, no gold or silver. Instead, the pots and bones in the caves belonged to the king's servants, the men and women who built the city. Pachacuti died in 1470. His body returned to Cusco. But Machu Picchu remained his, even in death. Only his servants were allowed to stay, living out the rest of their days in obscurity. Ironically, the city that was once home to the greatest Inca of all was in time forgotten, even by the Incans themselves. While war raged below with the Spanish, the city on the mountaintop remained untouched, unknown. It remained unchanged until 1911, when one man, dreaming of glory, stumbled upon this Incan wonder. A place where time seems to stand still, as though the Incans never left. "500 years ago, the mountains were gods, the thunder their voice, the sun their ruler, and the Incans their people. In the 1400s, this great Renaissance produced magnificent monuments. Golden art created. An empire flourished. Halfway around the world, at exactly the same time, another empire was growing, Spain. Cities of just 50,000 people, a poor country with great ambitions and little tolerance for those who did not worship their God. Their churches strained to reach the sky, leaving the world and nature far behind. Inside, believers were given glimpses of God and the afterlife to come. In 1532, this empire of God collided with the Incan Empire in Peru. Appalled by sacrifice, but amazed by gold, the Spanish took over, leaving ruins in their wake. But one Incan temple survived the conquest. A sacred city built to be near the gods. Rocks carved to join with nature, not to transcend it. The only unmolested ruin in all of Peru, Machu Picchu. A silent reminder of a lost world and the price paid when empires collide. Incas.
He was never trained as an archaeologist. He was on the Yale faculty. He was a professor of Latin American history and geography rather than archaeology. But it was a time when exploration was very much in the news.
It is an age when the very ends of the earth are within the reach of human footsteps.
September 7th, 1909. Commander Robert E. Peary has discovered the North Pole. From all over the world comes full acknowledgement of Peary's feat and congratulations on his success.
A time when the thrill of exploration fascinates everyone, from the pauper in the street to presidents like Teddy Roosevelt. When a great discovery can make a man more famous than a movie star.
Kipling wrote a poem that influenced my father, I'm sure, called The Explorer, in which the phrase...
One of America's most famous politicians, Hiram Bingham III, a senator from Connecticut. He is tall, handsome, and has made a name for himself as an author, professor, pilot, and now as a politician.
The autogyro is away for the golf links. It's an easy step to the links by autogyro.
His upper-class bearing earns him as many enemies as friends. He is a man of contrasts and enormous ambition.
It is good for the government, it is good for the country, and it is good for all of us to enjoy a good glass of beer.
But none of this would have been possible had it not been for the greatest adventure of his life, 20 years before. June 1911. Hiram Bingham packs for a journey to the jungles of Peru. His goal is to seek out the legendary lost city of the... Over 500 years ago, before Columbus ever dreamt of America, a great civilization thrived in Peru. 10 million people lived in an empire with palaces as large as any in Europe. Buildings coated in gold, the Incas. They ruled an empire as large as ancient Rome. 15,000 miles of roads, crime virtually unknown, master architects. This remarkable empire was crushed and conquered by the Spanish conquistadors in the 1530s. But high in the mountains, one city escapes untouched. Carved from giant stones atop sheer granite slopes. Forgotten for centuries, it is Peru's greatest riddle. Built between heaven and earth, no records explain it. No one remembers who built it or why. A city in the clouds, Machu Picchu. The man who will find it feels lost. He comes to Peru hoping for a discovery that will make him famous. At first, the world will ignore him and his discovery, but when they finally see what he has found, his dream will come true. He will bring the world to the city, and the city will bring the world to him. In the final years of the 1920s, this man is...
It appears something lost behind the ranges, something calling to you, go, words to that effect. So it seemed natural to achieve fame by becoming an explorer.
June 8th, 1911. Bingham's quest for fame leads him on a journey to Peru. He brings a team from Yale and the latest books on the Incas. But why Peru? In 1909, the South American history teacher saw his first Incan ruin, Choqquequirao. Some said it was the lost city, but Bingham has his doubts. The lost city is still out there, and a seed is sown in Bingham's soul. Bingham's family is no stranger to adventure. In the 1820s, his grandfather left New England to become Hawaii's first missionary.
In my book, Portrait of an Explorer, I had to go back to his early history for some of the